Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to today's event. I'm Jason Gumpert from MSDynamicsWorld.com, and I'm glad to be hosting today's event all about the upgrade or migration decision and paths from Dynamics AX to Dynamics 365. Our speakers today are Amir Koshniyati and Alex Quitney of Avantico, and it's great to have them back today. I know they have a lot of content, so I'll let them get right to it, but as we start, please know that you can enter your questions and feedback into the Q&A block you should see to the right of the main presentation window, and I know they will be watching that. So without any further delay, Amir, I am going to hand things off to you.
Thank you. We want to welcome everybody to today's webcast. Whether you are on version 4, 2009, 2012, and you are looking to immediately or over the course of some time move to 365, you are in the right place. We'll be discussing different methods of upgrading, migrating, and potentially even re-implementing over to Dynamics 365. I do want to note today's session is going to be a very high-level overview. There's going to be many different facets for each version and every scenario that we will be covering. And we will be available over the next few weeks to have one-on-one sessions with many of you to identify your unique circumstance and then assist you with the move. In addition, we will be in Summit this year in Nashville at booth number 473. And our time in the expo is going to be dedicated around these topics and to assist everybody in their unique situation. So just some notes there. And again, it is booth number 473. So before we get started, I do want to go into a quick overview of who Avantico is. The name may be new, but the standard services and people are the same. We formerly were AX Mentor, and last week, if you had not heard, we rebranded over to Avantico formally. And we did this mainly because we wanted to better align for our client success, especially with the market change over to Dynamics 365. And just a brief overview, as many know, we have been founded in 2006, been a Microsoft certified partner ever since. We are a member of the TAP program and early adoption takeover of many of the products. We do have members of the team who are AXUG and CRMUG board members. We also have an MVP as part of our team in Alex Quitney, today's presenter. We're headquartered in San Diego. We have offices that span up the West Coast and through Europe. Our expertise is mainly around manufacturing distribution, professional services, mainly around financial services, public sector, and then retail, specifically focused on e-commerce. Our services span all the way through help desk, proactive and reactive services. We have road mapping, data migration services, solution discovery, road mapping, development, implementation, and a handful of training through AX and CRM. We do have a public sector practice, and we have many add-on products. Prominently is our product WAX. It's an address verification validation solution that we've partnered up with Experian in developing. We also have a mobile framework and an advanced public sector module as well. I'm Amir Koshniyati, as Jason noticed, marketing and sales lead at Avantico, and I'm joined here with Alex Quitney, the technical architect, prominently known MVP in the channel, and a product manager over at Avantico. And with that, I will hand over the reins to Alex for today's webcast.
All right, hi everyone, my name is Alex Quitney, and I'm going to be probably going quickly through a lot of this because I have a ton of content. I did want to say there will be a recording available after, so if you miss something or if I go quickly over something, you don't have to worry about screenshots or anything, you can go to it. So I wanted to start this discussion by saying if you're looking at upgrading to or migrating to 365, you currently may not have a great grip on all things Dynamics 365 yet. So the next few slides are to provide some important background context about 365. So first, what you have to really understand when looking at 365, you kind of have to understand Microsoft's direction. So what is Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations Enterprise Edition? Other than a mouthful, it's just, from the most general sense, it's a piece of software designed to run business on. And given that, you can also say every business is unique. So with every business is unique, how does Microsoft accommodate unique business needs with a single piece of software? Their solution is they partially open source the code base and allow customers to customize it to fit their needs, which would be what's called overlaying the base code. So given that information, how does Microsoft grow and scale the software while supporting customers with further diverging code bases? So a little bit about the history of AX. For 2009 and 4.0, if we pose that same question, how does Microsoft grow and scale the software while still supporting the customers? What they did was they isolated code in layers. So you would have service packs and hotfixes. They would create a SIP layer, which is a patch layer, above your system layer, your base one, and then your code would have to be merged and refactored as needed to fit into the new code base. So these service packs and hotfixes are often long, expensive, painful processes. They're applied infrequently due to the effort, costs, and testing associated with them. And you can generally regard a service pack or a hotfix as a significant engagement. So if you're on 2009 4.0 and you have to have a service pack or hotfix, it can be a significant engagement. For 2012, we posed the same question. So how does Microsoft grow and scale the software while supporting customers with these further diverging code bases? So what they did was they introduced models as isolation containers, which was a major improvement, but the granularity just wasn't quite there. Models didn't contain just the deltas, but they contained entire pieces. It was also too easy to switch between models and make mistakes, and then the execution of it isn't there either. You could do circular model references, where A would reference B, B would reference A. You could have, it's a non-rigid model object dependencies. Lower objects could reference objects in higher layers. Version control issues with multiple models due to the lack of granularity. And there's also various quirks of models where you could inadvertently pick up other objects. And again, a service pack and hotfix is still difficult. So that brings us to Dynamics 365 for operations. So how does Microsoft grow and scale the software while still supporting customers with further diverging code bases? What they've introduced is called the extensibility concept. And what this does is it allows the underlying objects to be strategically changed and refactored without impacting extensions. So that means your upgrades, hotfixes, changes can be installed with low or no impact. And so the granularity is not quite there. Only the changes exist in the extended object, so that is new. And then also there's rigid model dependency options. They've sealed certain parts of the code base for modifications, and that's really to protect us from ourselves. But you can still modify those different parts using the extensibility model. So it just doesn't let you modify it through bad practices. And then version control is also utilized with better granularity. And so you can identify exact code changes and relate those to work items and provide accurate change tracking. A work item is, you can think of as like maybe a functional design document or some sort of abstract task that you can tangibly connect your code changes to. So what this is basically as close to software as a service as Microsoft can get. And my bold prediction on this is it's likely the final version of AX or any other version name changes, and you may never have to install a new version of AX again. And so you can say it's similar to Wikipedia or say the encyclopedia, where encyclopedias, they started off with books, and you had door-to-door salesmen, and you get the latest version, and then eventually you would get CDs, and then now it's the web, and the web is generally the final medium as changes are really done in place. So Wikipedia is constantly improving their site. They're changing mobile framework, all sorts of things, but for all intents and purposes, it's the last version. And that is until maybe there's some major leap in technology, like the Matrix, or maybe you can download the encyclopedia directly in your brain. But until then, it's the final version. So given that, AX, as many of us know it, is essentially a static state product. Users come in and they look at it, and it's the same every day. Microsoft wants to move the product towards something similar to Windows Update, where you'll get notified and you'll next your way through it and be done. So you'll potentially install hotfixes for problems you don't even know you have yet, or even better, you'll install new features like Cortana Intelligence Suite or things like machine learning. And this will be on a monthly cycle as it's released, instead of a one or multi-year cycle that many users and partners experience due to the difficulty to implement. So I want to also cover some extensions and overlaying. The graphic on the left, I'll let you kind of digest that, where on the left side is your overlaying, and on the right side of the graphic is extensions. From a simple sense, you can think of overlaying as if you wrote some code in a file, and I go in and write my code in that same file. Whereas extensions would be if I wrote my code in isolated files that hooked into your code through various methods that were oblivious to your code. This allows you to develop unimpeded, well, I can do what I want with my customizations. So extensions essentially allow Microsoft to develop the core product at the same time you develop your customizations without impacting each other. So this makes things like layers, even today in your current system, much less important. So overlaying is generally bad and should be avoided. Extensions, they allow you to be responsible for your code. They're compiled into separate assemblies. You can see this in the graphic on the right side. There's improvements in the application lifecycle management. The extension models simplify and improve performance of deployments, builds, test automation, deliver to your customers. There's also the design time improvements. Building your model or project doesn't require you to compile the entire application. Granted, many of us will still compile the entire application because we do. Servicing is in the cloud. Microsoft now, they can install, patch, upgrade, and change internal APIs without affecting your customizations. Previously, had they changed APIs, you have to do these complicated merges. And then the upgrades, again, unlike the overlaying, it reduces the cost of upgrading significantly to a new version. And when they say new versions, that's pretty much new releases of the same software in place that ideally you'll be able to frequently take advantage of. So your users could potentially come in on every month seeing new features. So I also want to discuss the difference between upgrade, migrate, and re-implement as it relates to these slides. So when you upgrade, this brings your code and data forward. And your code would need to be refactored, but you have your system pretty much in its entirety. When you migrate, so when I refer to migrate, I'm discussing the Microsoft toolset that's imported into AX 2009 to massage data forward to 365. Your code and data structures in this scenario would need to be created in the target environment. And then re-implement or implement, I'm sure you all know this is just standing up a new Dynamics environment, implementing using traditional methods, import, export, manual setups, configurations, and then your code and data structures would also need to be created in this target environment. So the paths I'm going to be discussing are 2012, 2009, and 4.0. So for 2012, these are the paths. Now these infographics I've made, they're not, Microsoft has yet to release their public graphics, but these are correct from what we know. So from all three of these options, one path is to re-implement, obviously. And if you're on R2 or RTW of 2012, you would have to upgrade to R3, and then you could do a direct upgrade. They are on the roadmap though for a direct upgrade themselves. Microsoft's working backwards. They're doing R3, and then they're doing R2, and then RTW, and then they will be on the roadmap though for a direct upgrade. Also, where I have path 1, path 2, there's no significance to the numbering, so don't think one path is preferred over the other just because of the numbers. So for 2012, I'm going to talk these points right here. There's many factors to consider for deciding whether to upgrade or re-implement, so don't take this as a comprehensive list by any means. These are just thinking points. So why might you want to re-implement? If you have many customizations that you don't want to bring forward, you may want to. Another thing is if you want a clean start for some reason, sometimes companies want to dramatically change the way they do business in AX. Maybe you're consolidating multiple isolated AX environments. Say you have an AOS in Europe and an AOS in the United States that both have their own companies and they're isolated, and you want to consolidate that. You would probably have to re-implement because there's not an immediate solution for that. And maybe if you have unsupported ISV solutions that are going to cause a problem. Why might you want to upgrade? So if you have low or medium customizations, upgrades are usually pretty straightforward. If you have supported ISVs, or maybe you need all your data in your tables and you want your system in its entirety. Those are just some reasons. And again, this isn't a comprehensive list, it's just some thinking points. Also, there's a kind of a third option I didn't detail, which I consider a hybrid approach. What you can do is you can use the tools provided by Microsoft to get the pieces that you want. For example, you may want to upgrade your code and then just migrate your data. So instead of recreating your code from scratch, you can use the tools that Microsoft provided to pretty much upgrade your code, but then you could just choose to migrate your data manually. Alternatively, you may want to upgrade your data and just drop all your code and start from scratch, and maybe just bring forward your schema. And then also for migrate, there's all sorts of ways you can get there because AX 2012 and 365, they have very similar database schemas. So you can use DIXF, OData, any sort of custom imports if you want. So you could do some sort of hybrid approach. Okay, for 2009, this graphic is something that I've produced, but it's correct because it's made through common sense conclusions. We know that we can get from 2012 to from 2009 to 2012, so we know that these paths are correct. So your first path obviously is re-implement. The second path is where you can migrate, and that's just you migrate and you migrate your data. The last path is where you can do a double upgrade, and so you could upgrade from 2009 to 2012, and then you could do a direct upgrade to 365. That would give you pretty much your data and your code and everything in its entirety. I'm going to detail these paths here in the following slides as well. So I'm starting with path 2, which is the migrate. I'm going to just jump back so you can see it again. This path 2 in the middle. So this is generally the recommended path by Microsoft. It's recommended for any level of customization, and what it does is it uses the specialized Microsoft tool set, and it brings forward select data only. You can see the select data below, but I'm actually going to detail that in another slide, so don't worry about the last part of these bullets. And then path 3 is the double upgrade. Some possible reasons for choosing this: maybe you have low customizations, where the effort isn't tremendous to get your code and data up. If you may choose this if you decide that data migration is more painful than code upgrade, because if you're using the Microsoft Migrate toolset, in that you decide that's just more difficult to get all your data, and your code isn't too difficult, then you might choose this. Any other unique business reasons you may have? It potentially requires double testing. When I say double testing, it means if you upgrade your data from 2009 to 2012, you may want to test and validate that data, but you could also wait and just do a double upgrade and get it to 365 and do validation on your last spot. And then it's a potentially a little higher risk. And the reason I say higher risk is you can imagine that upgrade scripts may not be perfect, and running everything through 2 sets of data upgrade scripts could have some unpredictable behavior, but that would be flushed out through testing. And it can be more complete because a double upgrade is going to bring your entire database forward, and you'll get there. For the first path to re-implement, you'll want to do this when other paths don't work or other business reasons require it. And then another reason is if you're on AX 2009, you may be on older data, and some businesses fundamentally change the way they do business over time, and it may be time to revisit the way you're operating. Okay, for 4.0, the paths are similar, but they are a little different. For the first path, you can re-implement always. The second path, and this is an interesting one that I'm actually going to detail as well. I'm going to detail the remaining paths, but the second path right here you're looking at is one that I actually think is very interesting for anyone on 4.0, is you can upgrade to 2009, and then you can use the migration utilities. And then the last path would be a double upgrade. You can upgrade from 4.0 to 2012, and then you can upgrade to 365. And so there is mention of, so there's a chance that Microsoft will bring their migration utilities for 2009 back to 4.0, but they haven't made any announcements, and it's not on any roadmap. The reason I know this is I was in Seattle with the guys who built it, doing a workshop with them, and I just asked them, I said, are you going to bring it to 4.0? And they said, we're thinking about it, maybe. So that's kind of where they're at with it. So I'm going to discuss the double upgrade path. So some reasons you may want to choose this is if you have low customizations. Again, if you think the data migration is more painful than the code upgrade, then you may choose this path for the double upgrade. Any other unique business reasons, it's similar. It may require double testing, or you could do your final testing in 365. It could be higher risk because you're going through 2 sets of upgrade scripts, but again, be more complete. So path 2, the upgrade and migrate. This is the one that I find the most interesting, and I would consider if you're on 4.0, I would probably lean towards path 1 for re-implement or path 2, upgrade and migrate. Some reasons to choose this: the effort to go to 2009 versus 2012 is lower. 2009 and 4.0 are pretty similar, whereas 2012's got things like the SIL, it's got a model store, they've normalized the database, it's pretty significantly changed. So if you're able to get from 4.0 to 2009 reasonably easily, which I've done plenty of those upgrades and they're not tremendously difficult, it could be worth it to you to do that so that you can use those Microsoft migration utilities instead of re-implementing. And then, so the ability to use those 2000 tools would be great instead of doing CSVs, Excel, etc. If you have lower medium customizations or you're concerned about your data and not all of your customizations, that's other reasons, because this is a good way to get your data forward and you can manually make your customizations. You can use this essentially as a hack to easily move data though, and if you only move your data by upgrading the schema only. So what I mean by that is you can just smash through and upgrade purely for the purpose of getting your data and schema in 2009 so that you can use those migration tools provided by Microsoft. You don't need to concern yourself with testing things like forms, form functionality, reports, etc. Because if you want to take your 4.0 environment and essentially just get all your data in, you can pretty easily just smash through that upgrade just to get it so those tools will work. And then the last path, re-implement, is when other reasons don't work. And again, 4.0 is a very old system, so carrying forward and massaging forward potentially 10 years of bad data may be undesirable or overly difficult. Or if your business, by the time you're on 4.0, the way you do business may have dramatically changed. So you still may consider re-implementing, but you could also do a hybrid re-implement with this previous path upgrade then migrate, because that can get the data that you do want, say like your customers or vendors, things like that. Okay, so migrating from 2009, this is that last bullet point I wanted to discuss. So it brings forward select data only. So configurations and setups of like your ledger, customer groups, vendor groups, master data like customers, vendors, project accounts, balances from ledger stock, prices, open documents like invoices, or pending invoices, POs, sales orders, etc. Brings your system configuration, number sequences, user groups, users, and then anything represented as an entity. And so you can create your own custom entities on both ends to allow you to push that to any set of data that may not be covered by this tool easily. You can think of an entity as allowing communication agnostic of environment. So an entity pretty much is a representation of data. So if you have your vendor table, that's the data in its raw form. But if you create an entity to describe the vendors, that represents that data, and that means it doesn't matter what system it is, because a vendor is a vendor as long as you describe it in an entity. So what do you actually do? So this is what happens when and I'm trying to trim out the fat and just get to the needles of what happens when you migrate from 2009. So there are various revisions right now floating of the 2009 tool. Some of them are an XPO, some of them are KB, but by the time if you would consider this, you'll probably it'll be a KB once it becomes public, if it isn't already. So the KB itself is low impact, so the merge there's not a difficult merge. You just install it, and it's pretty much all its own objects. You install GIXF components, and you install other miscellaneous prerequisites such as like Access Database Engine, just little EXEs. You create a SQL account, or you can use your SA account because it does do direct SQL. They provide an Excel or CSV of default values that you load in, and I'll discuss that Excel later. And then you set up in your 360 or in your 2009 environment, you set up your 365 Azure connection information. The reason you do this is in 2009, using the tools, it'll connect to your 365 environment and download the list of entities that are in 365, so it knows what to communicate with. And then also it allows you to push data directly into 365 should you choose to. You don't have to do that. And then your target system in 365, you just import a package into the Dynamics environment, you compile and sync it, and that allows 2009 to communicate with it. So that's really all you do for the setup. It's pretty straightforward and it's not very difficult. One thing I also want you to understand is this stuff is likely subject to change, and the screenshots may no longer line up with what you see when you do see it, but they should be similar. I've personally provided a bunch of feedback, screenshots, documentation since this version directly to the guys at Microsoft, so things can still change for the better, hopefully. And then there's also going to be some other miscellaneous details such as sequencing, related table discovery, field mappings, etc. I'm not going to cover in the interest of time, but they're not terribly difficult to figure out, and that's just part of the tool set. So migrating from AX 2009, so I want to give some thoughts on the upcoming screens. So this is an X++ based framework utility at its core. So what this is tremendous. So what this means is so the documentation is not currently there, but what is there is not robust. But simply looking at the source code can often find ways to figure out what's going on. So this is very useful, but it's good to know that what's going on isn't rocket science under the scenes, or under the hood, which is good. So that lets you, you can make simple customizations to the utilities that you can solve unique business-specific problems that the tool's not designed out of the box for, because it's X++. You can just make your changes right on the fly. And so ultimately what this produces are data packages to load into your target environment. So if you think, it doesn't matter what customizations you make to the utility, as long as your data packages come out the right way at the end. And I've already done little changes, and I'll show you later on in this, that are useful to things that I want that may not be useful to everyone. This is an iterative process. You go through this, make data packages. If you see things are wrong, you try it again, and you continue. So it's iterative, but it's great. It can be done with deltas as well. So when I say deltas, it uses the modified datetime on your records and enables that on the AOT in the user layer or whatever layer you happen to be operating in. The reason you may want to use deltas is if you have a very narrow cutover window and you are pumping in tons of data to D365, and then you need to pump in whatever deltas have changed so that you can just pump that last bit in and do a cutover. If you don't need to use deltas, then I wouldn't use them. So I wanted to start with a screenshot of what you'll see in 2009 so you can kind of digest this. When you install the KB, you get this data migration area. And I'll turn on the laser pointer. Okay, cool. So in this area, so I want to first, if you're expecting a perfectly designed process where you follow steps 1 through 10 to get your data from here to there, that's not exactly what it is. It is a little wild west, and also these forms and setups are built by engineers, not by users, so they can be confusing. But if you understand that, then it makes it a lot easier to use the tools. So for example, this generate maps right here. This is essentially what you would consider your setup parameters on all of your different areas. I don't know why they call it generate maps, but you can think of this as parameters. Another example, create migration group right here. Well, you do a lot of your operations, this is where all your migration groups are. You also create them and operate in them, so it really should just be called migration groups. So it'll be confusing if you're just trying to figure this out unless you know that it's a little confusing. So here is your setup. See how it's DMT parameters? I'm going to go back one slide. That's this generate maps. Basically, it's your parameters. And I've clicked through the different tabs so you can kind of just get a look and see what you're seeing. Right here, this default configuration, this is Excel you load in. Again, I'll discuss this a little later. You have your export path, your SQL credentials, and some pretty simple setups here in the 2009 side. And then on your operations side, this is where you set up your different Azure information so that it can communicate to 365. Now, this is all from the Microsoft's demo deck, so the data in here is meaningless. And then also some thoughts on these. The way that when they were making this, I'm pretty much sure like the engineers basically would say at some point, all right, we need a button to do something. Let's just throw it on the parameters form. So this generate maps button, for example, this probably belongs on its own form. I think this form is essentially a parameters form and an initialization form combined together. Okay, here's another screenshot. This is your Migrate company. This is where you choose what legal entities you want to migrate. It gives you row counts of pretty much every table, and then it also is useful to give details and drill in. So you can say, here's your overall, and if you go into your details, it's good for getting an idea of what you're dealing with, but it's not, anything incredibly useful. So here's another screen from one of the other ones. These are your data. These are your data conversions. And what they are it gives you a rudimentary method to take an EDT, and whenever we come across a specified source value for where that EDT is found, we convert it to that specified target value, so your source and your target. So you can see this would be a problem, though, if you had like maybe an inexperienced developer in your system that didn't use a correct EDT or didn't extend the correct EDT. Is this a major problem, though? Probably not, because once issues are identified, you can fix the code and in some cases data in your source system, and it'll resolve it because it's an iterative process. It's defined at an EDT level, so like your country, currency, unit, etc. And it's on your source side. Here's another screenshot. This is your financial dimension setup, where you map your sources to target, and it uses the separator from the other parameter screen. And then here is inventory dimension setup. So I don't believe you can currently change this, but they said it may change in future releases. And again, I'm showing these screens so you can kind of just see what you're getting to. You may have to review the video if you want to really digest them. Here's your chart of accounts. This is where you configure your chart of accounts. I've clicked through the different tabs, overview, detail. Looks like this got a little cut off, but it's just chart of accounts, legal entity. And then here's your opening balances tab. And then this is your configure ledger. There's 2 tabs, pretty straightforward. And then here, this is a little bit more of an interesting screen. So this is kind of where you're choosing your data, like what you want to migrate. Just because when you use migration tools, all those things it brings forward, it doesn't bring all of them forward unless you choose to bring them forward. So you can pick and choose. And that's one of the really robust and great things is that this is X++, so you can really dig in and modify it. So when I talked about that Excel earlier that I had mentioned and I said I was going to bring back up, this is where I'm bringing it up. So when you load the default Excel, it contains things like these highlighted modified queries here in that Excel. And so it puts those in there. And so if you see this green query checkbox thing right here, this is actually a suggestion I made to Microsoft. All of these rows don't have queries. Some of them do. Well, you can't tell which ones do, and so I simply said just put a column here with the checkbox that would indicate for ones that do have queries. Now, will Microsoft implement that? Probably, but I don't know. I don't really care because I could do that in like 15 minutes because it's 2009. When I say it brings forward things like open sales orders, you can see why it brings over open sales orders because it says in that Excel, select sales orders where the sales status is 1, which is open. You could change this query. This is standard ANSI SQL. You could change this if you want. Now, if you were to change this, though, there's additional considerations that come with this, such as the underlying tables or related tables or any other posted tables. So, but because this is, you have tons of control over what you can do with this tool set. So these migration tools may be very good for a lot of people. So now I'm going to talk about upgrading to 2012. So this is the slide that Microsoft has on their upgrade site. It's a lot to kind of take in, and it also doesn't really tell you a lot at the same time. They have their evaluation phase. So this is where you sign up for LCS. So LCS is Lifecycle Services. I will discuss more what it is a little later if you're not familiar with it. It's pretty much a collaborative workspace sort of dashboard for everything to kind of link up to. And in this analysis phase, you do your first step is where you run analysis against your code, and it gives you kind of a report to estimate. Then you actually run the upgrade of your code, and it does does your code upgrade. And then you can deploy data, create a project plan, and then once you kind of get through that, you go to your implementation phase, where you execute. So you first, in your 2012, your source environment, you do your preparation tasks. You perform your code upgrade in the 365 environment and develop any additional new code that you may need or want. And then finally, once you've got your code, you perform your data upgrade and you validate it. All of these other steps, these are pretty common: testing, cutover plan, functional, etc. So now I want to talk about the 365 upgrade guide. So in previous versions of Dynamics upgrades, the upgrade guide was mainly static as one giant PDF of very detailed steps. You go through the PDF and you would have to go through it very carefully because there's often like one sentence caveats that if you miss, you could have problems with. So in the current version of 365, here's the root page for the upgrade. You can find this online too if you Google. It's an online, and it's still changing. So as they make improvements, they make changes to the upgrade guide to the web pages. Some of the screenshots don't line up, and the instructions don't line up with the provided objects. If you follow the upgrade guide, it may have a screenshot or instructions, and then because they've made changes or improvements to it, they don't align anymore. It's minor though. Instructions also, they're spread across multiple pages and they're broken into smaller subtopics. This is just more useful to navigate, but on some web pages you only use part of the instructions, or you may use only the second half of the web page. So, if you click on one of the instructions that say see here to how to do it, you might still have to drop down to the second part. And then also there's a good amount of small important caveats for different scenarios, such as if you're using retail, do this, or if you're using some specific version, do this. So with these upgrades, you have to be very careful with all the different caveats if you're following this. So I want to talk about the high-level steps. These are the high-level steps of exactly what I think you're doing. So when I say, what are you going to do for this? I'm going to gloss over the details, but I'm trying to cut out the fat so that these are actual tasks. And I'm going to break each one of these columns, topics, into further detail on other slides. And so if you're going to upgrade in 6 months or something, will this process change? Probably not a whole lot. So this is pretty much what you're going to get. But Microsoft is trying to trim steps and increase automation. So that is on the roadmap. And these titles here are coincidences. They are not going to be found in Microsoft. So, but you can consider these are kind of the same. So first, you analyze. What this means is you can use the LCS tool to analyze, generate reports, and convert to your D365. After you've done that, you kind of perform the code upgrade in your Dynamics 365 target environment. I kind of think of the 3 R's, and again, these 3 R's are something that don't exist anywhere else, but I made them up. You refactor, remove, and release update. Those are the kind of things you need to think of when you're doing your upgrade. And Then you prepare your environment. So you go to your 2012 environment, you install hotfix, you follow through a checklist, and you kind of prep your data to go. And then what you do is you take that data that you prepare and you store that just your Transact database in a D365 environment parallel to the existing D365 database. If you're using Azure SQL versus local VMs or Microsoft SQL, they have different methods. You'll use things like SQL package, backpack, some one-time SQL scripts. But what it boils down to is you're restoring a database. You're just getting your database from source to your target. And then the last step is you run. So you run your data upgrade package, and they have these two deployable packages you run back-to-back, major version data upgrade and major version data upgrade underscore retail. You run those, that upgrades your data, and then you're done. So I'm going to go into the analyze a bit more. So you create your LCS project, you sign up and you create your LCS project. I'll go a little bit more into detail what LCS is, but it's kind of the head or like the brains of where everything connects. Once you create your LCS project, you link LCS to version control, VSTS. So again, if you don't know VSTS is Visual Studio Team Services. It's Visual Studio's online. It used to be VSO, and it's also the online version of 2000. I'm not sure if there's anything. I think they're chat messages. There are also online versions of so VSTS, it's an online version control system. So it's for TFS. If you're familiar with TFS, it's the same thing except it's online. It's optional, but recommended you link this when you do this process. But VSTS is essentially required. And version control systems, you should always use them. They're tremendous and they're fundamental to code. So when you actually do your upgrade and your analyze phase, I suggest linking it. So what do you actually do? You go to your 2012 environment, you export your model store, you zip it up, and you upload it to LCS and press go. If you check this box, it'll just give you the reports only. If you otherwise, you just upload it and you hit go. So what does this do? It converts code to D365 XMLs, it checks in the version control. It creates VSTS work items and checks in the code. It produces task lists and then estimates your upgrade effort to lift it. So I want to give you some screenshots. So this is VSTS right here. This is your work section. And so some context on this is what I've done is I did an upgrade from 2012 to 365. I've gone through the process. I followed it. And we have an ISV. It's called Quax. It's an address verification tool. So we need it for 365. So I did the upgrade, and so that's what you'll see is this content. So it provided these work items where it says these are some of the tasks that I need to do. And these are these abstract tasks. And it says, okay, here's all your tasks. And you can go through and you can plus new work items, and you can create a new one that says test this. So these are just ways to track your work. The next screen right here, this is all under analysis. This is your code section. So we were just looking previously at the work. Now this is the code. So it has a lot of objects in here, but it kind of boils down to is these two sections: metadata, which is just your code, pretty much, and then your projects, which are collections of code in an organized fashion. It's got these three different solutions that it generates. Code merge solution is where it's project per model with elements needing resolved. Your unparsable solution, this would be objects that couldn't be successfully converted to XML. So since this takes your whole model store from 2012 and parses it, it tries to parse it and figure out everything and turn it to code in 365. So if you've got some weird objects, maybe some loaded, some images, or maybe, I don't know, some strange code that it couldn't parse and figure out, it'd land in here and basically say we didn't know what it was. For my projects, I had nothing in here, and the goal is to never have anything in here. Microsoft is moving towards that goal. And then the last is your upgraded solution, and this is a project per model of your upgraded objects. So this is in VSTS after it's done, and you can then it checks it all in, so it kind of baselines it. So I want to go through the analysis, continue on this. So how useful are these reports that it produces? Here's kind of a screenshot of the Excel reports. It's a lot of grids of tons of data. I think it provides a good bellwether. How accurate are the estimates? Not very accurate, I don't think. I applaud the effort, but for mine, it said 17.12 hours for what took me, potentially 2 months to upgrade. But while going quickly, while having a good understanding of what I was doing. So, like I said, it's a great bellwether, but there's things like refactoring that is not captured here. The refactoring effort can be huge. So if you have one object that it says I can't convert it, you need to resolve it, that one object could be potentially weeks of work to refactor to the new code system, or it could be a week, or say if it has a report that you have to completely make from scratch. This is, again, only a bellwether. It gives you an idea kind of what you might be dealing with, but it's definitely not accurate. So if you were to run this and say your partner, and it said 17 hours, and your partner says it's going to take 12 months or something like that, then these aren't great. But maybe what you could potentially use this for is if this number is extremely high, maybe it just says you should re-implement, and if it's extremely low, maybe it's probably still going to be potentially difficult. So here, I want to talk about why would you need to refactor. So if you have deprecated features that were previously in use that are no longer available, you need to create a new solution. So that's one of the refactors. Certain methods of customizing code are no longer supported. It requires new styles of development. So some of these new styles and some of the new things like this method overloading, class state, disposable context, chain of command. These are some of the new styles that you'll have to do. And then also you'll need to convert your code to the extensible model. Sometimes when you do the upgrade, it'll just dump it and it upgrades your code all right, but it puts it in, it'll do it in overlaying models. So you need to convert those to extensible model to save yourself huge headaches down the road, and there's really no reason to overlay unless you have a tremendous need. And the only reason I think you should generally overlay is for very specific use cases, and it should be very minimal. So for refactoring, I want to talk about some of the deprecated features, technical examples and functional examples. Again, so I just cherry picked certain ones from the deprecated features. There's a huge list online. You can see all this URL to see the list of the deprecated features, but I just picked some ones that I think will bring home. Enterprise Portal is gone. ActiveX managed host controls, they're gone now as well. They're replaced by the extensible control framework, which supports new controls that are based on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. AAF, AXD, and AXBC integrations, those are gone. AIF is replaced by the data import-export framework. Direct database SQL access. This is no longer available. Microsoft is locking the database down, and it's really for our own good as much as we don't like it. Some other deprecated features functional. So virtual company accounts. These were created often to do table sharing in older versions, so you could share tables. They're often difficult to set up and prove to cause problems. They kind of remove this to protect us from ourselves. And then also when you have virtual company accounts, data from your origin company is lost because it ends up with your virtual company account data area ID. Data partitions, those are used for data isolation. Data isolation is gone, or partitions are gone. Data isolation will be done from multiple databases or instances, and that's on the roadmap. It's not currently there, but essentially, instead of having one database with all of your data isolated by partitions, you'll have multiple databases. And if you remember back to my previous example of why you might want to re-implement if you're on 2012 and you have maybe an AOS in Europe and an AOS in the US, well, that would be actually an ideal scenario for this once it is roadmapped, where you could potentially have your different companies isolated in the different databases. And this is brand new. They haven't even mentioned anything about multiple database support, so I wouldn't hold on too long. Role centers, those are also gone. They're replaced by workspaces. So now I want to talk about the next section. So we've gone through the analyze. I'm talking about the code upgrade now. Let's start with the remove. So you want to look at this as an opportunity to tidy up. You want to avoid carry forward of unnecessary data and code. So use this as an opportunity to remove unwanted customizations, ISVs that you don't use anymore, remove customizations that are replaced by new functionality. So get to, you want to get close to the base if you can. And then also just use this to remove the junk. Code upgrade. So I want to talk about the release update, the third R. So you can create your custom update tasks to do your desired data transformations using the release update framework. And this underlying framework for the data upgrade is largely the same as the 2012 X++ batch job framework with the release update star classes. So it will be familiar to you if you've looked at those. If you haven't, they're not too difficult to figure out. Basically, when you do your code upgrade, you'll write these custom update tasks to handle certain custom data upgrade pieces. So code upgrade, I want to show the this is actually your prepare environment. So in your in your 2012 environment, you import an XPO, and so this is where you prepare. So what you do is you have these different options: validate, prepare, etc. It's an XPO that's really simple. The only thing you have to merge is potentially your main menu item. So you don't really have to merge anything. You get this new menu item. So validate baseline version. And if you can see this URL here for more detail on what all of these are, but I'm actually going to try to talk about the detail of what they actually do, just because I more want to know exactly what it's doing. So the validate baseline version, what it simply does is it just says, is your AX version compatible based on hard-coded values? It just says, is this version greater than the version that we accept? Nothing more. It's very simple. Prepare model data metadata. So this one is one that's interesting. What it does is it creates in SQL directly in your transact your business database a table called model element, and then it inserts everything from your model store's model element table into it. So basically bundles your relevant model store database data into the transact database. So you know if you're in R3 and you have your model store and your business database, there's two separate databases. Well, when you go forward, your model store is left behind. So it needs relevant pieces of data from that. So it just inserts it in here. So knowing that it does this, if you did a database sync after running this step right here, it'll likely drop that. So don't do that. And then prepare security. So what does this do? So when you install the KB, it brings in some brand new tables. And there's one table called security role upgrade that it brings. And it just takes two fields, AOT name and rec ID, from your security role table, and then inserts them into the staging table. And you can see why more they do this on this URL. Set up user mapping. I'll show a screenshot of that on your next slide. But what it does is it opens a form that just simply maps your users from their 3-digit or 4-character user ID to their 365 email. It's that simple. Archive retail salt data. What this task does is it's used to migrate the registry key that retail salt utility uses. This tool is used for some deployments where customers may want to inject a specific random value into the hash that's used to authenticate channel users. More detail is here. So when you do a data upgrade, like I said, your model database is left behind. So the data contained in there gets bundled in. Any relevant data that's in that model database that's needed is bundled in business data. All of your code that you do on the code upgrade that's essentially your model database. But like the little small bits that it can't handle, such as like table IDs and field IDs, it'll bundle quickly into here. So now that you've prepared your system, I wanted to also actually show a couple screenshots. So here's just the code, and you can land on this again and rewatch the video and screenshot if you want. You can see that sys administration and sys checklist are the only two sys objects. Everything else it creates is new. So there should be almost no merge unless you customize this or this. And so, 10 or 15-minute merge. And then here's the user mapping I was talking about. It just takes your user ID and your email. And if your users already have emails, you can just import. If it doesn't, you can just import from a file. It's very simple. So the fourth column in that slide of what you're actually doing is the restore. So this is basically restore your prepared database in your 360 environment, either Azure or if you're using MS SQL, into the line, you're getting your database from 2012, you've prepared it into 365. And then now we're actually at the run. This is where you're going to run your data upgrade. So here's the URL you can go to and see, and this is the main data, or the data upgrade one. But the way these things, this is still working, it's still changing. It's changing ideally for the good. Right now, and I'm going to kind of jump down, Microsoft has it on the roadmap for an automated upgrade where you can take your database, upload it somewhere, and it'll upgrade it automatically. This is a command line. It's not really a friendly upgrade cockpit you may be used to. In 2012 and 2009, you would launch a data upgrade cockpit, and you kind of click next, and you can monitor it, and you could refresh, and kind of click around in it. This one's more command line. It does a lot of the same stuff, but it can kind of feel a little bit like a black box. What it does is it runs a combination of PowerShell code and utilities, and then it also has some manual steps in here. So it might get a step, and it'll say do something manually where you have to do that. Previously in AX 2012, the checklists that you've seen before, the checklists and upgrade cockpits, they felt much more combined to AX and the database. And isolated that environment, whereas this, it potentially interacts more with the whole environment of the system. An example of that would be kind of where it could interact with the registry to store and retrieve data. It's compressing files, doing a lot more stuff than that. And it also can require digging into various PowerShell and XML scripts to understand what's happening. So if you have an issue, it may say step 6. It does its best to provide you with log information, et cetera, but what it boils down to is you just got to open the PowerShell and read what you're trying to do, and you can usually figure it out pretty easily there. I've personally gone as far to decompile some of the assemblies to see what it's doing. That's not quite necessary, but I was able to pretty quickly figure out what was happening by doing that. And it's not too crazy though, so it's pretty beneficial. And one thing to also understand is that it's pretty straightforward and it's also pretty robust. So don't be afraid of what it's doing. You can see on the screenshot over here these different steps. So here's the sync engine. So when I'm running through it, it'll do a data upgrade and it launches the sync engine, which is kind of an undocumented, but it's basically a tool to do database syncs. Here's another screenshot right here. So I want to show some screenshots. So step 3, this is a manual step. So it says, please back up your database now. So you stop some services back up. This step 3 though, actually, for the AX upgrade, this is where you swap databases. So when I said you restore your database into a 360 environment parallel to it, well, you run through you start this data upgrade, and then you at one point, and you get to step 3, and you rename the old database, and you rename your new database to what it was before, and you swap them. There's also things like this, where it says compressing and whatever, and it says everything's okay. So I've had this where it sits for a long time, and I don't know what it's doing, and you're sitting there thinking something's wrong, but also staring at the words everything's okay. So it's kind of you're not sure what to do, but everything is okay there. And what it's doing in this case is it's compressing all of these files and taking backups of your 2012 environment and storing them for later. It doesn't really make it super clear where it's going because the stuff's scrolling off the screen, but there's a runbook working folder where a lot of this activity is going, where it'll take your backup and stuff. And then also, I don't believe it cleans up that runbook working folder, so you may notice if you've done like upgrades or if you apply other patches, you're starting to fill up some files. It's because this folder may have files in it. I wanted to also go over some example problems that I've run into. So major version data upgrade, that's one of the zips. I downloaded, for this screenshot here, I downloaded the wrong version of major version data upgrade, which I didn't realize there are different versions. I used the LCS issue search, which is different than the LCS environment tile. So LCS is lifecycle services again. The environment tile is environment aware, while the issue search doesn't know what your environment is. So when I had one from an issue, and this file you'll see kind of packaged all over the place, but it's included in many different downloads, but you need the latest one. And they're not all the same. So I see the zip file and I'm thinking they're all the same, but they're not. They keep updating, so you want to get the latest one. Another example I had of an issue. But when you do the data upgrade packages, so your SQL sync issues are going to present themselves here. Such an example, so say it'll create new indexes that could present issues of bad data, where it'll say new unique index and you have bad data. So the best approach would be to go to your source system and resolve that information. So if you have duplicate data that can't be there, you need to resolve that. You can also use consistency check in your source system, 2012, 2009, or whatever. It's always useful to do that to kind of flush out some of your bad data so that sync problems aren't there. In this one, it might be hard to see, but what it's trying to do is do a database upgrade. It's saying it's creating objects for sync. So it says invalid object name, company info view, and then it says create view DBO QUA address. So this is a custom view I have, and it's 2 different names. It doesn't make any sense. I actually talked to some of the guys at Microsoft, and they think this may be a bug, but this is an edge case. But they're going to probably fix this here soon. And what all I did was I just dropped my offending view, and then it got recreated. There's no big deal. I have a feeling it has something to do with the sequence it's creating views, but you may get certain things like this, and you have to rerun through it. And this data is very useful. It can be a little scary because it's a black screen, but it's not. So for the AX2000 upgrade, where is the pain? It's primarily in code refactoring and creating any new objects because there's new technologies to learn. You also have potentially new integrations to build, new reports and dashboards to build. There's new concepts to understand. It can be a far slower process in some areas and then faster in others. And the environments are also more restrictive. So when you're going from 2012 and upgrading to 365, it's all pretty much onto the code upgrade, and that's where the pain is. Why is the data not? Well, the Dynamics 365 database started from the AX2012 database. They took the actual database and built off of that. So they're very similar schemas. So the effort to transform the data is low. So when I show the screenshots of the black screenshots and you've got the data upgrade scripts and stuff, it's not doing a ton of different data transformations. So that's really not a ton of effort. So that's not really a lot of your concern. Some things I want to talk about. What can you do now? You can develop with the extensibility model in mind. You can think pre and post events. You want to isolate your code from your base environment as much as possible. You want to follow best practices, avoid shortcuts. So your bad habits, they can catch up. When I say isolate code from base code as much as possible, you may have your code overlaid in, say, like an insert method of your sales table. If you've got a big block of code there, move that block of code to a new method, and then in that insert method, just call your method. So that way it makes it a lot easier to upgrade later on. You want to use a version control system, specifically VSTS. If you use TFS now, they're essentially identical other than one's online. There are some small differences. But the reason you want to use a version control system is because it's mandatory in 365, but also it's good for fundamental core development. It's, you should be using it. You want to learn how it works with check-ins, change sets, branches, learn the methodology. You want to understand how various work items are and implement a strategy. You can have different strategies. Different organizations have different strategies. Find one that works best for you. LCS, you want to use LCS and learn it as it will be mandatory. It's nothing crazy to learn. And what LCS is, again, and this details a little more, it's a collaborative workspace. They use it for telemetry, monitoring, and diagnostics, and also to view that. It's used for issue search, hotfix. You use package deployment. You'll upload packages and use it for deployment because you don't really have direct access to your production environments. And it's also a support portal for you to make support requests and for your own users to make support requests in their environment for you to fix. What else can you do? So familiarize yourself with Visual Studio. This is the new development environment replacing Morphex. Visual Studio itself is obviously not new, but it's the development environment that's new to 365. You use it for debugging, compiling, etc. For your integrations, use like the data import export framework, as AIF is appreciated. You want to understand what data entities are and how they work as this concept extends beyond DIXF to CDS, which is Common Data Services, and other technologies. Learn OData. 2012 you can have OData, but it's got some limitations. And then also learn other systems to integrate. Don't integrate with old methods. Don't create classes that do direct SQL stuff. You want to lean away. You want to lean away from any sort of like little things like that and kind of stick more towards core fundamental stuff that they're trying to push out there. And also embrace the cloud where you can. Or like, who wants to host an email server internally? So with that, I'd like to conclude. If you have any questions, you can contact Amir. We are going to be at the AXA D365 Summit in Nashville, and you can find us at booth 473, and I'll also be there. And then just shoot us an email, and I'll open the floor to questions now.
All right, thanks, Alex. So I'm not seeing any questions yet, but they are starting to come in. So please do enter yours, and we'll take as many as we have time for. So the first one here, you talked about the Dynamics 365 and it being cloud-based. Can you talk about on-premise and how it differs when it comes to upgrades?
So that's a tough question. So it should, in terms of upgrades, so on-premise and in the cloud, they can be pretty significantly different in terms of what they are, but for upgrades it should be almost the same because it's at the core of the product, it's still code, and then it's also still going to be a data upgrade. So they should be pretty much the same. And then also the video of this is going to be available. I know I went fast, so.
Right. So let's see if we can get to maybe a couple more here. So someone notes that you spent a lot of time in 2012. For 2009, how much does 2009 have in common in terms of processes, challenges that you discussed for 2012?
For 2009, I would say it's fairly different for a lot of the processes. Because 2012 and 365 are very closely related, while 2009 and 4.0 are more closely related. So there's some pretty significant changes. But yeah, I mean, there's some pretty significant changes, but still fundamentally the code is, concepts are pretty much the same. So they're not too different, but they are different. That might be not hard to answer the question there.
All right, so there's a couple questions here about access to the slides as well as the recording. The recording will definitely be available. I think if you want to request the slides, maybe it's best to just reach out directly to Amir, just request them.
Yep.
That's probably your best bet there. Next question, is the 2012 migration as easy as if there's R2 and or R3 installed?
Okay, so if you have R2 right now,
I'm sorry, this person's on R2.
Okay, yeah. So if you have R2, it's not, a direct upgrade is not currently supported, but that is the very first one on their roadmap to support. And once they support R2 should be reasonably easy. It should be the same. One of the things that would concern me is the model store and the business or the transact database are separated. And in R2 they are separated, so that makes it easier. Like RTW, they were all in one database. So you have to think if once they support a direct upgrade, that their upgrades are going to have to like split that database essentially. Whereas R2, you're already at that point of a split database. So it should be relatively easy and pretty similar to 365 or to the R3. And also R2 to R3 are very similar. Similarly to R3 to 365 are very similar.
Okay, someone wants to know if Microsoft will be patching a production server, how the rest of the environments get patched. Does Microsoft handle it, or is it the responsibility of the customer, and how would instructions be provided to users about patches?
So that process is changing. It's changing over time. Right now, the way it really works is you work with what's called a DSE, and that's your dedicated systems engineer or dynamic system engineer. It stands for one of those. And that's basically someone at Microsoft who does the production processes. They give you time in advance. They let you upgrade your sandbox, and your tier 1, your tier 2, and then eventually your DSE will do it. And so you do have time in advance, and it's kind of a collaborative process. I do think that they're looking to give you cutoff windows, though, where they say you have to do it by some certain point. And if you're familiar with, say, like maybe Salesforce also, they do stuff like that. It's similar to where they say, all right, you have this amount of time to go through testing, do whatever, and then we're going to, it needs to go forward. And like anything Microsoft, if you had extenuating circumstances, you could still potentially stop that. Now, there has been a case in the past where Microsoft has updated. This was at the very beginning of D365. They did upgrade, I heard, a customer's production environment before the customer was ready. But now they're really getting everything pretty ironed out to where it's a pretty straightforward process. And again, with the extensibility model, upgrades aren't going to be tremendously difficult because of the way it works, and that's a huge benefit there.
All right, someone would like to know about product dimension group. Will it work the same way in 365 as in 2012?
I think so, but I would have to defer that to one of our more functional guys here. And for that one, you can feel free to reach out to us. I think it works the same.
And as an overall strategy, would you recommend using a data warehouse to park historical information and avoid this data migration?
Well, it depends on that. It really depends on your business case. If you need the historical data just for reporting purposes and stuff, you could use a data warehouse. You could leave your 2012 environment stood up purely for historical. If you need to access that data in your live 365 environment for ongoing reports and stuff, at that point, I'd consider. And it depends on what version you're on. I'd consider just the data upgrade. If you're on 2012, definitely data. I would just think definitely data upgrade because the databases are so similar. The only reason you'd want to park and archive that data is if maybe you thought it was causing any sort of performance or significant impacts. But otherwise, bring it forward. If you're on 2012 and you're migrating data, that would be a potentially candidate for, say, that data warehouse to archive. And then also you can use a BYOD, bring your own database type thing for additional reporting, and then that way you can bring forward your 2009 data using the migration utilities to 365 to operate on, and then you can kind of bring your historical data in whatever fashion you want to, say, report on.
Okay, someone here is sharing a comment. I have trouble imagining how updates from Microsoft, like hotfixes, would be installed by Microsoft without impacting customizations and not or without requiring testing first. For example, if Microsoft added a parameter to a function and it broke something.
So you do get the testing for sure. And if a lot of this, you can kind of think of it as almost like kernel updates, to where when you get a kernel update in 2012 or 2009, a lot of people install those with no issues, and they upgrade your DLLs and everything in the kernel. Well, that's code in there. Those kernels, like if you ever like decompile them and stuff, it's still code that goes through and does stuff. So what they're doing is they're updating it, but because the way they know they have to make everything backwards compatible. So they pretty much update the internal code, but they keep the APIs the same. They keep everything backwards compatible. That's what they're doing here. They're upgrading essentially your sys or SIP code, and they're keeping everything backwards compatible. The way the extensible model works, though, is it's fundamentally it builds into all the other stuff. So it really does work pretty well. You do want to do testing for sure. So that is part of the process, but it's extensible model is implemented pretty well, so it doesn't really cause too much impact. That's their whole goal, is that they want to scale the software. They want to be able to develop and go forward with they want to make new products. They want to make bug fixes without customers sticking on year-old versions.
For virtual companies, did Microsoft plan a mechanism to still share data between companies? Have they planned any tools to switch that to a new mechanism?
They do have tools, yes. On that link that I sent, they have what they replaced it with. I think they've just basically shared more of the core data that you need. You'll have to visit that link, though, for their specific replacement. They do have a specific replacement, and it'll be on. You can reach out to us, and I can follow up with that one.
All right, well, that takes care of the questions. So, Alex, thanks for fielding all those, and thanks to you and Amir for presenting today. Always great to have you joining us, and thanks to everyone in the audience for your questions as well.
All right, thanks, everyone.
All right, we're going to wrap it up there. We have recorded today's event. We will be sharing that soon. And, thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.